Welcome back to the People's Cabinet. Okay, a new poll just came out yesterday from CBS News. I think it's really important to go through it because it has some signs that Donald Trump is having a lot of trouble, while also some concerning things for people who are not part of the MAGA movement to really focus on. So let's start with deploying the National Guard because that is something that Donald Trump has on high, been very adamant is important, that is making cities safer, like DC, when certainly many people who are there do not share that. And what's really important as we look through this is the difference in partisan divide in the favorability or not of these policies. But I want you to, in particular, look at independence because when it comes to 2026 or 2028, that is going to be the share that we really need to win in order to end the MAGA movement in 2028. So, interestingly enough, Trump deploying the National Guard to Washington, D.C., it's 43% favorable, 57% opposed, roughly the same thing with other cities. So, this notion that Donald Trump continues to say that this is an incredibly popular initiative doesn't hold water. And if you look at the breakdown, with independent, as I mentioned, 93% oppose it on the Democratic side, whereas 85% approve it on the Republican side. We are just so incredibly divided as a nation. This shows it. But if you look at independents, which I mentioned is probably the most important block to look at from an election perspective, 64-36 oppose, which should really concern people about and concern MAGA about favorability on this, because the perception was, oh, everyone loves, having more National Guard, and this should be fine. I think it's clear that the electorate is more sophisticated than people are giving them credit for when you look at the opposition, even from independents. Even when you look at does deploying National Guard to the U.S. cities reduce crime, and this was surprising to me because I think a lot of people say to themselves, well, if you bring a lot more law enforcement to a place, the perception from Republicans and MAGA is that everyone's going to think that crime's going to be okay. Again, 86% say no on Democratic side, 89% say yes on Republican side, but on the independent side, it's 55-45 in favor of no. And to that point, you look at how people who think it's more safe favor the deployment heavily, and those who don't. Um, and there's a bunch of other stuff on rights here. And so what's most interesting is this larger point. Would you favor or oppose the National Guard to your local area? 61% oppose overall. So I think we should be concerned about this because the notion that um, uh, the notion that somehow Donald Trump is this is a losing issue for Democrats just doesn't hold water when you look at the data. This is where I think there needs to be a little bit more concern here, is that if you look at Donald Trump's approval rating based on this poll, it's up 2 points. Now, the margin of error is 2.5%, which is just a fancy way of saying we don't know within this range what's actually real in terms of the number. It means that we need to keep fighting and we need to keep the messaging going forward because I believe that Donald Trump continues to roll out terrible policies, but there seems to be a floor emerging in terms of his approval rating. We should all be incredibly concerned about that. It's also interesting when you look at what Republicans think are the most important to judge the Trump administration. They're saying immigration overwhelmingly, whereas Democrats are saying government agencies, programs, and spending, as well as the economy and inflation. One thing I'm a little bit concerned about here is that I don't know what they mean by government agencies, programs, and spending. And as people who listen to this program, you know that I care a lot about government agencies. But I think macro, most people care about an efficient government. And when they hear, that government's trying to get smaller, I'm not sure they care as much about that in terms of being against it as they do the economy being good and inflation being under control. And so when I see this equal thing with Democrats, I get worried about the priorities of some of the elected officials who would look at this data and say, I should come out hard to say that we shouldn't shrink government at all. I think most people would agree that government's probably too big and that we need to shrink it a little bit. I just believe that it needs to be done in an effective way and not just for show, which I believe what the president is doing. More stuff on tariffs here, U.S. tariffs on imported goods. People are continuing to oppose 62-38, that area. 39%, almost 40% have bought less because of the impact on tariffs. That should be concerning to Donald Trump. If people are worried about spending and being able to afford things, and 40% of people are buying fewer things, that should concern the president a lot. What is really fascinating, though, is I talked about some of the divisions between Republicans and Democrats. This question: should Americans be willing to pay more to support Trump's trade policies? The fact that so you see 94% say no Democrats, no surprise there. The delta in terms of independence here is probably the biggest, 71-29. Republicans are saying 70%. Now, they're saying that 70% of them are saying that they will be willing to pay more to support the president. Now, we know that the president has an incredibly loyal MAGA base, but this, even with that, surprised me. I am not sure when push comes to shove, people will really want to pay more for their everyday groceries just because they like Donald Trump. I actually don't think that that is ultimately real, but it is telling that they would say that, and it just shows the loyalty of the MAGA base to Trump. Um, here's one area that is of most concern: the Federal Reserve and the economy. Best if the Fed makes decisions. Okay. Best if the Fed makes decisions independently from Trump and guided by what Trump wants. 68% say independent. But if you look at the breakdown, uh, again, independents overwhelmingly and Democrats are for this. Republicans are 59-41 based on what Trump wants. And if you break it down by MAGA, it's actually just over the majority holds with MAGA, but not with non-MAGA. The Fed being independent from the president is critical because the Fed needs to be making decisions based on economic indicators, as I've talked about in previous videos, not what the president is saying. Because lowering or raising interest rates, i.e., being able to put more money into the economy or not, should be based on how the economy is doing and not what's politically expedient for the president. That is what is the Fed independence is what is the difference between us and so many other countries that are corrupt or increasingly corrupt. The fact that there are so many people on the Republican side that think that the president should just control the Fed shows candidly how far we have to go in terms of making sure people understand what is at stake. Because Republican or Democrat, you put a president in charge of the decisions of lowering and raising interest rates, you're going to have serious, serious non economic influence over our entire economy. And when you insert politics into that to the level that that is suggesting, our entire economic system would collapse, in my opinion, very, very quickly. And faith in that economy, too, which has implications for our entire markets that I can get into at a different time. Last thing I wanted to cover is the big, beautiful bill. And it just shows that actually effective messaging is important. As you know, Democrats and even some Republicans were concerned, either on the Republican side about what it added to the deficit, but more importantly, on the Democratic side, about what it could do to programs that are so important to people who need it the most, like Medicaid. 3961 approved to disapprove. If you look at the ideology, as I was talking about it being very important, 93% of Democrats disapprove, which shouldn't surprise anyone. But the moderates that are so important to us in the elections, 69-31. The moderates that are important to look at, 69-31 against. That is important because it means that these swing voters don't like what Donald Trump is doing, that we got to continue to hold him into account. 78-22 approved conservative. That shouldn't overwhelmingly surprise anyone. But this is what I mean by communication and fight. We are winning when it comes to one of Donald Trump's signature legislations. We are winning when it comes to looking at how this is affecting people's pocketbooks, the tariffs or what have you. We need to keep on this and not let Donald Trump off the hook and not give up and say, we can't be fighting anymore because whatever Donald Trump does, he gets. This data shows that there is an opening, that we need to continue to reiterate this message, and that we can't let up, especially because his approval rating has started to level off. And we need to continue to make the case to American people that these policies hurt and that the Democratic platform helps. And we need to not just say it, we need to show them. We need to give examples like Pete Buttigieg did this weekend about the fact that the Republicans are no longer going to try to pursue policies that will allow you to get a refund when you're inconvenienced during your flight. These things are important to people. The things that are adding to the economies, adding to the price of people feeling in the economy, like things like tariffs, are important to people, and we need to keep on this. We hope you enjoyed this episode of the People's Cabinet. If you did, please like, subscribe, ring that bell, and tell us who else you would like to see sworn in. And let us know in the comments what other topics you'd like us to cover. Let's go.